I've made clear to the intelligence community that unless there is a compelling national security purpose, we will not monitor the communications of heads of state and government of our close friends and allies.
Well, that was President Obama pledging nearly 2 years ago to stop spying on our allies. But a new report saying the administration kept NSA surveillance on some of our closest allies, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and some of our own lawmakers, by the way. Their conversations got swept in with the snooping. Now, some here say we should be paying the NSA to spy on our enemies, not on our friends and our neighbors. Are they right or wrong? Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus to find out with Steve Forbes, Mike Ozanian, Elizabeth McDonald, Sabrina Schaefer, John Tamny, and David Mercer, former Deputy National Finance Director for the DNC. So, Steve, wasn't this a direct violation of the president's pledge not to spy on our allies?
Sure it was, David, but this president doesn't pay attention to such niceties. And in terms of allies, he probably didn't consider Netanyahu and Israel an ally at all, certainly not by his behavior. The fact that he let Congress be swept into this is a shocker, shows he thinks Congress, in essence, is a toothless tiger. And sometimes you do have to spy on an ally, like we did in the early part of the last decade of the German Chancellor Schroeder, who was very close to Putin at the time and doing some very strange things. But unless you have those exceptional circumstances, it ought to be hands off.
David, what bothers the Israelis most about this is that they were specifically targeting Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, because he disagreed with the Iranian deal. In fact, I spoke to a former Israeli ambassador about this this week on FBN. Let's play the tape.
I hope very much that there was no cyber implant, because that would be a total invasion of privacy and a disgusting act, not only, from the U.S., but against such a close friend.
So they really object to that specific targeting in a private office of an ally.
Well, I think if I were in their shoes, I'd be more mad that we didn't know that there was a cyber device in the Prime Minister's office. That's what I'd be concerned with. But secondly, it wasn't just Netanyahu. It was also President Erdogan of Turkey that, as even a NATO ally, was kept off of the list as Bibi was with regard to eavesdropping. And the purpose of it, specifically, which had the assent of members of Congress, I might add, was to, in the discussions or the talks on the Iran deal, there was also the concern that Israel might take a preemptive strike against Iran. And in that instance, it was deemed necessary
we all remember that,
check into that surveillance.
Right. But of course, David, we should emphasize, and I'll go to EMAC on this, that what's most troubling in all this is that U.S. congressmen and congresswomen were swept into this spy net that they threw out, and some of their private conversations, just as pending legislation on the Irandeal was being discussed. The president may have been able to use some of that private information from U.S. congressmen through the NSA to make his own plans to combat their views. Yeah, that's against the separation of powers.
Yeah, that would be an unprecedented abuse of power. You're right. It is an issue of separation of powers there. Wow, the White House really needs to get out in front of this. They have to come out and say we're not spying on members of Congress, because now members of Congress are saying we want answers. We may hold hearings on this starting next week. Certainly, Senator Dianne Feinstein is saying this is not the way to go. Pete Hegstra is very upset about this. So you could see action from Congress retaliating on this matter.
And Dianne Feinstein, we should mention, of course, is a Democrat. Mike, in fact, the chairman of the National Security Committee and the Oversight Committees have sent a letter to the head of an intelligence agency saying these reports raise questions concerning the process that NSA employees follow in determining whether intercepted communications involve members of Congress and the latitude agency employees have in screening communications with members of Congress for further dissemination within the executive branch. Again, the executive branch, the president, is not allowed to use spy agencies that we all pay for to spy against his political enemies inside the U.S.
Well, I say good luck with that investigation. We saw where the investigation into the IRS went. We saw where the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails went. Stonewall, Stonewall, Stonewall. By the time any of this even has a chance of getting anywhere, President Obama will be long gone.
But Sabrina, again, it's our money. We're paying the NSA a lot of money in order to keep us safe. Spying on U.S. congressmen doesn't fit that bill.
No, David, and of course, it's not simply the lawmakers who are being spied on, but pro-Israel groups who are, having conversations. Those are citizens who the government was spying on. I think this actually gives real legs to Senator Paul in his run for president right now, as he's saying we have to be much more vigilant with all of our spying programs. We have to make sure that our surveillance is not sort of this dragnet surveillance, but instead targeted and legal surveillance, which clearly this was not.
John, we tried to get the budget of the NSA, by the way. We couldn't because it's classified. But as it becomes more involved in domestic affairs, if this isn't stopped, maybe it shouldn't be classified. Maybe we should know how much they spend and get involved, the Congress should, in deciding how they spend that money.
Yeah, I think anytime government's spending money on anything, it should be declassified. We should know this. But my bigger question is, what would we care about what's on the mind of world leaders? We know how inept ours are. Would anyone care what's on the mind of Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi or some of the other clowns in Washington? And so I say end the program simply because it probably doesn't give us a lot of actionable intelligence and only succeeds insofar as it offends other countries.
Yeah, but Steve, remember, the president got his Irandeal through. And maybe some of the ways he was able to do that was based on the conversations he was listening to from U.S. congresspeople.
Yeah, they were in effect spying on Congress, spying on the Israelis, because they did want to get that deal through. And the idea that they wanted to know if the Israelis were going to take preemptive action. The Israelis almost did it 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so this was long past the idea they're going to take military action. Obama wanted to get that deal through Congress, and he didn't care if he trampled on the Constitution to do it.
Yeah. David, remember, it was Richard Nixon that was, I mean, he wasn't actually impeached, but one of the charges against him was he was using intelligence agencies of the United States to go against political enemies. Seems like there might have been some of that here.
Well, I would unequivocally say that was not what was going on, nor was it the intention. And as I mentioned earlier, this had the assent of members of Congress. And I would add also...
Hold on a second, David. The original, you're right, the original spying to make sure that there wasn't a preemptive strike by Israel against Iran did, but that was before the president made his pledge to stop it. Congress didn't approve of this spying.
They did on this spying, and I will also add that the Israelis were spying on the U.S. and using that information to lobby members of Congress, interfere in our domestic affairs, and their interests as opposed to our interests.
People spy on people all the time, but you're not supposed to use spying agencies, EMAC, to go against members of Congress.
But they're
that's
not going
the point
against
here.
Members of Congress.
Well, that's what happened, EMAC.
We don't know the facts about it.
Nor was it disclosed.
You know what? This is breaking new ground. If the White House is spying on members of Congress, that is a huge shocker. And I agree with Mike. There would be stonewalling, but Congress really, in terms of a hearing, they really need to get to the bottom of it.
They sure do.